Hello, and this is the analysis portion of our previous video, which was a experiment with respect to binary option trading websites, where we compared the values of the same index across multiple sites. So, quick summary of our experiment. What we did is we picked two different trading sites, and the details of this are all in our previous video, and we examined the distributions of put and call options for the same sets of trades. There were 5 in all. For example, for the US dollar to the Japanese yen, on the first site we saw that 55% of people had called and 45% of people had put, whereas for the second site we saw that 58% of people had called and 42% of people had put. And these statistics are relevant with respect to the the majority vote strategy that we discussed for as part of our Understanding Binary Options series, which I believe is video 4 in that series. And that's what this experiment was trying to investigate. And we did so for 5 different indices. We did it for the US dollar to the Japanese yen, the euro to the US dollar, the Canadian dollar to the Japanese yen, the Australian dollar to the Japanese yen, and the New Zealand dollar to the US dollars. And the results are in the table over there. And what did we find? We saw that in 3 out of the 5 cases we had agreement, but in 2 cases we didn't. And that was in the case of the Canadian dollar to the Japanese yen and the New Zealand dollar to the US dollar, where the first site showed exact opposite split with respect to put and call. And in our second case, the New Zealand dollar versus the US dollar, we had site 1 saying that 53% of people had decided to call, while 47% of people had decided to put, whereas the second site showed 41% of people had decided to call, and 59% of people had decided to put. So that's quite a different set with respect to this particular index. And the last column on the right shows the maximal differences that were recorded for these particular trades. For example, in the case of the US dollar to the Japanese yen, the difference between 55% and 58%, that's the calls column in site 1 and site 2, is 3%, and it would be the same value even if we looked at the puts columns. And so that we see that for the New Zealand dollar to the US dollar, we saw a difference of as much as 12% with respect to the way people are voting. And I think that the reason this is especially relevant is, as per the majority vote strategy, we're essentially throwing our lot in with the way other people are voting, but depending on which site we're actually visiting, which trading platform we're using, the answer to the question of whether we should put or call could be quite different. So one interesting thing that does pop up is, what if we tried to use multiple sites? What if we actually didn't base our trade on one site alone, but we rather want to do it based on 2 sites? So I averaged what the calls and puts are across these 2 sites. And what we note is that, except for the case of the Australian dollar to the Japanese yen, that's the 4th row, and the euro to the US dollar, the split is actually quite close in certain places. It's 56%, 43%, or 58%, and 41%. And in the case of Canadian dollars, Japanese yen, since we had a perfect split the other way, it's exactly 50-50. So even if we average it out, the net effect of averaging it out might be that it makes it a little harder to decide whether we should actually put or call, because the distributions are no longer skewed either which way. So what can we conclude? Firstly, we should start off by saying that just looking at 5 different indices, that's not statistically significant, and we have to be very, very careful about what conclusions we draw. However, based on the data that we do have in front of us, we see that in 2 out of 5 cases, that's 40% of the time, we didn't have an agreement across sites. For all of the indices that we looked at, the maximum absolute difference was 12%. That means out of every 100 people, 12 people change their opinions from site to site. And what we notice with the last set of columns that we added in the table, averaging across the 2 sites makes it even harder to call, because the differences are no longer skewed either which way, either in the put or in the call direction. So that's what this video essentially wanted to talk about. It detailed some conclusions. Again, I wish to point out they're not statistically significant conclusions, but they are conclusions based on our data nonetheless, based on the experiment we had performed in the previous video. And I'll continue to perform similar small experiments as and when interesting things come up, and I'll go ahead and post the results. If you like what you're seeing here, please feel free to leave a comment or like and or dislike the video. Thank you very much.